Ready to pass the CPA exam faster? Visit cpapass.ai. Today, audit work papers, current versus permanent file exam traps. Audit documentation, or work papers, serves as the principal record of our work and the basis for our final audit opinion. On the CPA exam, remember the golden rule. If it is not documented, it did not happen. The ultimate benchmark for sufficiency is the experienced auditor standard. This means your work papers must stand entirely on their own without any verbal explanations. A competent stranger, an experienced auditor with no prior connection to the engagement, must be able to review your files and immediately understand the nature, timing, extent, and results of the procedures performed, as well as the significant conclusions reached. So let's break down how audit files are organized, starting with the permanent file. The permanent file contains documents of continuous multi-year significance that are carried forward year after year. You do not recreate these files every year. You simply update them when changes occur. Key items to memorize for the exam include the client's articles of incorporation, corporate bylaws, and long-term debt agreements. You will also find internal control flowcharts, pension plans, and long-term lease contracts here. These documents provide the historical and legal framework of the client. When auditing these areas, you refer back to this permanent file to ensure current year transactions align with these foundational agreements. In contrast to the permanent file, the current file contains evidence applicable only to the single year currently under audit. Think of this as the active diary for this year's engagement. It includes the overall audit plan and audit program, the working trial balance, and lead schedules that organize the trial balance data. You will also find current year bank reconciliations, confirmation replies, and adjusting journal entries. Additionally, the current file houses the minutes of board meetings held during the current year and the signed management representation letter. Once this audit year is complete, these files are archived, and we start a brand new current file for the next fiscal year. The examiners love to test your ability to distinguish between the permanent and current files, and they use two classic traps. First, while a long-term debt agreement belongs in the permanent file, the current year's interest expense testing and debt covenant compliance work papers belong in the current file. Second, corporate bylaws belong in the permanent file, but the current year's board of directors meeting minutes belong in the current file. Another critical exam trap involves oral explanations. While verbal discussions with management can clarify existing written documentation, oral explanations can never serve as standalone or primary support for your audit work. If a procedure or conclusion is not documented in writing, it simply does not exist in the eyes of the regulators. Now let's discuss the strict timelines for assembling and retaining your audit files, summarized by the mnemonic 45-60-57. Under AICPA standards for non-public companies, you have 60 days after the report release date to assemble the final file, and you must retain it for at least 5 years. Under PCAOB standards for public companies, you have only 45 days to assemble the final file, and you must retain it for at least 7 years. The memory trick to ace this on the exam is simple. Public companies face much stricter oversight, therefore you must assemble the files faster in 45 days and keep them longer for 7 years. Who actually owns the audit work papers? A common exam trap is thinking the client owns them. In reality, the CPA firm owns the work papers, though we must maintain strict client confidentiality. Once the assembly deadline passes, the audit file is locked. Deleting or discarding any documentation is strictly prohibited. However, you can add supplemental documentation if you discover a necessary modification. When making post-assembly additions, you must document exactly who made the change, the date it was added, and the specific reason why. This ensures a complete and honest audit trail that stands up to regulatory scrutiny.